My name is Evelyn Reed, and at 32, I thought I had it all. A solid marriage, a good career as a graphic designer, and a recently purchased two-bedroom apartment in a revitalizing neighborhood of Chicago. The plan was to eventually turn the second bedroom into an Airbnb, but life, as it so often does, had other ideas. I'd never imagined I'd be pouring my heart out on this corner of the internet, but here I am, driven to it by a betrayal so deep it feels like a physical wound. This whole nightmare started with a phone call. My stepsister, Serena, was on the other end, her voice thick with tears. Serena is 28, and her dad married my mom when I was in middle school. We grew up together, more like sisters than step-relatives. At least, that's what I always believed. She'd just been dumped by her long-term boyfriend, Mark. A real piece of work from what I understood. He'd cheated on her, thrown her out of their apartment, and left her scrambling for a place to land. "Ev, I don't know what to do," she sobbed, the sound cracking through the phone. "I have nowhere to go. I feel like my life is over." My heart broke for her. Despite our closeness, Serena always carried a certain fragility about her. She was beautiful, yes, with her blonde hair and big blue eyes, but also vulnerable, like a delicate porcelain doll ready to shatter at the slightest touch. I've always felt protective of her, even though she could be infuriatingly self-absorbed. Without hesitation, I offered her our spare room. I spoke to my husband Daniel about it that evening. Daniel, my rock, my everything. We'd been together for 10 years, married for 8. He's a software engineer, works remotely, and has the patience of a saint, something I often tested, especially when I was stressed about work. "Of course, honey," he said, wrapping his arms around me in the kitchen. "She's family. We can't just leave her out on the street." I felt a surge of relief. Daniel's approval always meant the world to me. We prided ourselves on being a team, making decisions together. It was one of the cornerstones of our relationship. So, Serena moved in. At first, it was fine, even pleasant. She was helpful around the house, always offering to cook or clean. It felt like having my sister back, the way things used to be when we were kids. We'd stay up late, watching movies, talking about everything and nothing. I genuinely enjoyed having her around. The apartment we'd bought, a fixer-upper, was almost ready. Daniel and I had spent months renovating it, painting, replacing flooring, updating the kitchen. It was our baby, a symbol of our hard work and future plans. The plan was to move Serena in there temporarily. I thought it would give her a sense of independence and a fresh start. I pictured it as a win-win. Serena would have a place to stay, and we could delay the Airbnb venture until she was back on her feet. I was so naive. The first crack in the facade appeared subtly, a hairline fracture I initially dismissed as my own insecurities. Daniel, working from home, started spending an increasing amount of time with Serena. I'd come home from work, and they'd be laughing together in the living room, sharing inside jokes I wasn't privy to. At first, I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just tired and stressed from work. But the feeling lingered, a knot tightening in my stomach with each passing day. They developed this weird habit of whispering. I'd walk into a room, and they'd immediately stop talking, exchanging furtive glances. It felt like I was intruding on something private and forbidden. Daniel's always been a genuinely nice guy, but even that has limits. After the apartment was finished, Serena moved in. But that didn't change anything. If anything, it got worse. She was constantly over at our place, supposedly just to hang out with me. But I noticed she gravitated towards Daniel. She'd linger in the kitchen while he made coffee, laugh a little too loudly at his jokes, and touch his arm a little too often. I wanted to talk to Daniel about it, but I felt ridiculous. How could I accuse my husband and stepsister of something so awful based on nothing more than a feeling? What if I was wrong? The shame and embarrassment would be unbearable. So I bottled it up, letting the suspicion fester inside me like a poisonous weed. I started having trouble sleeping, Every night I'd lie in bed, replaying the day's events in my head, searching for clues, for evidence to confirm my growing fears. Daniel would be asleep beside me, his breathing even and steady, and I'd feel this overwhelming sense of loneliness, a chasm opening up between us. About 4 months into this living arrangement, Daniel and I planned a camping trip, a weekend getaway to reconnect, to escape the city, and to hopefully reignite the spark that seemed to be fading between us. I was genuinely excited. We'd booked a beautiful campsite near a lake, and I was looking forward to spending some quality time with my husband, just the two of us. Then, the flu hit me like a freight train. I woke up on Wednesday morning feeling achy and feverish, my head pounding. By Thursday, I was bedridden, unable to even lift my head off the pillow. Daniel and Serena were solicitous at first, bringing me soup and checking on me regularly. But as the day wore on, I noticed a shift in their demeanor. Daniel started making comments about how it was such a shame to waste the camping trip, how all the bookings would go to waste. He was subtly trying to guilt me into suggesting that he go with Serena. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. The knot in my stomach tightened, twisting and churning with nausea. I stared at him, my eyes burning with fever and suspicion, and the more I looked at him, the guiltier he seemed to get. I feigned disinterest, mumbled something about not wanting him to miss out on the trip. They both protested, of course, putting on a show of reluctance. "Are you sure, honey?" Daniel asked, his voice laced with false concern. "I don't want to leave you alone when you're sick." "Don't be silly," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll be fine. You guys deserve a break." Inside, I was crumbling. I knew what they wanted. I could see it in their eyes, in the way they looked at each other when they thought I wasn't watching. With a final show of reluctance, they agreed to go. As I lay there in bed, listening to them pack their bags, a wave of despair washed over me. My husband, my stepsister, my life, everything was slipping through my fingers. That night, I made a decision. A desperate, impulsive decision that would change everything. I knew I had to find out the truth, no matter how painful it might be. I had to know for sure if my suspicions were justified. The gnawing uncertainty was unbearable. They left on Friday morning, bright and early. As I watched them drive away, a single tear rolled down my cheek. I felt like I was sending them off to commit the ultimate betrayal. By Saturday evening, my fever had subsided slightly. I still felt weak and achy, but my mind was clear, focused. I knew what I had to do. It was a crazy, desperate plan, but I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I drove to Best Buy, bought 2 small, discreet security cameras that could be controlled via an app on my phone, and drove back home. My hands were shaking as I installed them, one in our bedroom and the other in the guest room. I felt like a criminal, spying on my own husband, but I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. I spent the rest of the night tossing and turning, unable to sleep. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the leaves outside my window, sent shivers down my spine. I was terrified of what I might find. Finally, Sunday morning arrived. I got out of bed, feeling numb and hollow. I went through the motions of getting ready for work, putting on makeup, and choosing an outfit. All the while, my mind was racing, replaying every moment, every interaction, every suspicion. I kissed Daniel and Serena goodbye, a quick peck on Daniel's cheek, a forced smile for Serena, and left for work. I got in my car and drove away, feeling like I was leaving a part of myself behind. But instead of going to the office, I drove to a nearby Walmart parking lot. My hands were trembling as I opened the app on my phone and connected to the cameras. The live feed flickered to life, showing me a view of my own bedroom, empty and still. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. I knew what I was about to see could destroy me, but I couldn't turn back. I waited. The minutes ticked by, each one stretching into an eternity. The camera feed showed nothing but the quiet stillness of my bedroom. The sun streamed in through the window, casting long shadows across the floor. I watched, my heart pounding in my chest, feeling like I was on the verge of a panic attack. Then, at around 10:00 am, I saw her. Serena. She entered my bedroom, her movements slow and deliberate. She was wearing one of my nightgowns, a silk slip I'd bought on a whim a few months ago. It clung to her body, outlining her curves in a way that felt deliberate. I felt a surge of anger, hot and visceral, rising up inside me. She walked over to the bed and gently shook Daniel awake. I closed my eyes, bracing myself for what was to come, but I couldn't turn away. I had to see it. I had to know. I opened my eyes again, my vision blurring with tears. Daniel stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked confused for a moment. Then a slow smile spread across his face as he saw Serena standing over him. What happened next is something I will never be able to erase from my memory. The images are burned into my brain, seared onto my soul. I won't describe it in detail. It's too raw, too painful. All I can say is that they didn't waste any time. They were intimate. In my bed. In my home. With my nightgown. With my husband. I had a complete and utter breakdown. I started sobbing uncontrollably, gasping for air, my body shaking with tremors. I felt like I was suffocating, like the walls of the car were closing in on me. My vision swam, the world around me dissolving into a blurry mess of colors and shapes. It wasn't just the act itself, the physical betrayal. It was the violation, the desecration of everything I held sacred. My marriage, my home, my family, all of it tainted and ruined by their selfishness and deceit. I knew in that moment that my life would never be the same. The foundation upon which I had built my world had crumbled, leaving me stranded in a desolate landscape of pain and despair. I was a ghost, watching my life fall apart from the outside, powerless to stop it. Daniel and I had been together for a decade. We'd been through so much together: college graduations, job changes, family emergencies. We'd built a life together, a shared history, a bond that I thought was unbreakable. And now it was all gone, shattered into a million pieces by a single selfish act. The fact that it was Serena, my stepsister, made it even more devastating. I had loved her, trusted her, treated her like my own sister, and she had repaid me by sleeping with my husband, in my own home, while I was sick in bed. The betrayal was so profound, so callous, that it defied comprehension. The humiliation was almost unbearable. I had let her into my life, into my home, into my marriage. I had ignored the warning signs, dismissed my own instincts, and convinced myself that I was just being paranoid. I felt like the biggest fool in the world. I knew with absolute certainty that my marriage was over. There was no coming back from this. No amount of apologies, no amount of explanations could ever undo the damage that had been done. But as the initial shock and grief began to subside, a new emotion started to emerge: anger. A cold, burning rage that consumed me from the inside out. I wasn't just going to let them get away with this. I wasn't going to let them destroy my life without a fight. I wiped my eyes, took a deep breath, and started making phone calls. The first call was to an old coworker, Sarah, whose husband was a lawyer. I briefly explained what had happened, my voice trembling with emotion. She gave me her husband's contact information, and I immediately dialed the number. His name was Mr. Thompson, and he sounded calm and professional. I told him my story, trying to keep my voice steady, trying not to break down again. He listened patiently, asked a few clarifying questions, and scheduled a meeting for later that day. I hung up the phone, feeling a flicker of hope. At least I was taking action. At least I was doing something to protect myself. I knew that I had to confront Daniel and Serena. I had to look them in the eye and tell them exactly what I knew. I had to let them know that they couldn't get away with this. I drove back home, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles turned white. I parked the car in the driveway, took another deep breath, and walked towards the front door. As I reached for the doorknob, I steeled myself for the confrontation that was about to come. I knew it was going to be ugly, painful, and emotionally draining, but I was ready. I was ready to fight back. I was ready to take back control of my life. I opened the door and walked into my home, the place that had once been my sanctuary, now a battleground. Serena was in the living room, lounging on the couch, watching television. She looked up as I entered, a surprised expression on her face. "F? What are you doing home so early?" she asked, her voice a little too casual. I ignored her and walked straight to Daniel's home office. I could hear him typing away on his computer, oblivious to the storm that was about to break. I pushed open the door and walked in. One look at my face and Daniel knew. The color drained from his face, leaving him pale and clammy. He pushed back from his desk, his chair scraping against the floor. "Evelyn," he stammered, his voice barely a whisper. "What's wrong? What happened?" "I know," I said, my voice cold and hard. "I know everything." His eyes widened and he swallowed hard. He opened his mouth to speak, but I cut him off. "Don't even try to lie to me," I said, my voice rising. "Don't insult my intelligence. I saw it, Daniel. I saw everything." I could see the guilt and shame swirling in his eyes. He knew he was caught, that there was no way out. "Evelyn, please," he pleaded, his voice trembling. "Let me explain." "Explain what, Daniel?" I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. "Explain how you could do this to me? Explain how you could betray me in the worst possible way? Explain how you could sleep with my stepsister in my own bed?" By this point, Serena had come into the office, her face a mask of feigned concern. "What's going on?" she asked, her voice dripping with false innocence. I turned to face her, my eyes blazing with fury. "You know damn well what's going on, Serena," the first spat. "Don't play dumb with me. You're just as guilty as he is." Serena's facade crumbled, and her true colors began to emerge. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips curled into a sneer. "So what if I am?" she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You think you're so perfect, Evelyn. You think you're so much better than everyone else. But you're not. You're just a boring, uptight control freak. How dare you?" I screamed, my voice raw with pain. "How dare you come into my home, betray my trust, and then try to make me feel like I'm the one who did something wrong?" "Oh, please," Serena scoffed. "You're not the victim here. Daniel hasn't been happy with you for years. You're always working, always stressed, always complaining. He deserves someone who can appreciate him, someone who can make him happy." I turned to Daniel, my heart pounding in my chest. "Is that true, Daniel?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Is that how you feel?" He looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of guilt, shame, and something else. Something that looked a little bit like love. Or, at least, the ghost of what had once been love. "Evelyn," he said, his voice trembling. I don't know what to say. Just tell me the truth, Daniel," the first pleaded. "Do you love her?" He hesitated for a moment, then looked at Serena. She nodded, her eyes filled with expectation. "Yes," he said, his voice barely audible. I think I do." The words hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled back, gasping for air, feeling like I was drowning in a sea of pain and betrayal. "You lying son of a bitch," I screamed, my voice cracking with emotion. "You waited until you had your chance, and then turned on me? After everything we've been through? After all the years we have spent together? And you, Serena, I always tried to be a good sister to you. I brought you into my home. How could you do this to me?" Serena stepped forward, her eyes glittering with triumph. "He doesn't love you anymore, Evelyn," she said, her voice laced with malice. "He loves me, and I'm not ashamed to admit it. We're going to be together now. We're going to start a family in our home. I'm pregnant, by the way." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I felt like the world was spinning, like I was going to pass out. "Pregnant?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. Serena nodded, a smug smile on her face. "That's right," she said. "I'm carrying Daniel's child. I looked at Daniel, my eyes searching his face for some sign of remorse, some flicker of humanity. But there was nothing there, just guilt and shame, and a strange, almost bewildered expression, as if he couldn't quite believe what was happening. I couldn't stand it any longer. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't think. I just needed to get out, to escape the suffocating atmosphere of betrayal and deceit. I turned and ran out of the office, out of the apartment, out of my life. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I drove aimlessly for hours, tears streaming down my face, feeling like my heart was being ripped out of my chest. Eventually, I checked into a cheap motel on the outskirts of town. It was a far cry from my beautiful apartment, but I didn't care. I just needed a place to be alone, to process the devastation that had just been unleashed upon my life. That night, I received a text message from Serena. "Daniel will be moving into our apartment in a day or two," it read. "Just thought you should know." The message was like a slap in the face. It was so callous, so arrogant, so utterly devoid of empathy. It confirmed everything I had suspected about Serena, that she was a selfish, manipulative, and utterly heartless human being. But as I lay there in the darkness, staring at the ceiling, something inside me began to shift. The grief and despair began to give way to a new emotion: determination. They thought they had won. They thought they had gotten away with their betrayal. They thought they had destroyed my life. But they were wrong. They had no idea who they were dealing with. They had no idea what I was capable of. They had no idea that I was about to unleash a storm of vengeance that would make their lives a living hell, because I was Evelyn Reed and I was not going down without a fight. Here's the thing about Serena and Daniel's little victory parade. They forgot one crucial detail. The apartment they were so smugly planning to build their new life in? It was mine. Legally, undeniably, solely mine. See, when Daniel and I bought the place, his credit score was a disaster. Years of reckless spending in his early 20s had left him with a mountain of debt and a tarnished credit history. He'd been working hard to rebuild it, but it wasn't quite there yet. We wanted the apartment badly and were advised to use my credit so that we could get the best mortgage rate possible. So, the loan was in my name. The down payment came from my savings. The monthly payments were drawn from my credit card, which I paid off religiously each month. Daniel contributed to our overall finances, of course, but on paper, the apartment was 100% mine. Ironic, isn't it? They thought they were stealing my happiness, my husband, my life. But what they didn't realize was that they were about to be trapped in a cage of my own making. As I lay in that dismal motel room, staring at the ceiling, a plan began to form in my mind. A plan so audacious, so satisfying that it almost made me smile. Almost. I spent the next few days in a whirlwind of activity. I met with Mr. Thompson, the lawyer, and laid out the details of my situation. He was sympathetic and professional, assuring me that I had a strong case for divorce and that I had every right to evict Daniel and Serena from the apartment. "We can serve him with the divorce papers tomorrow," Mr. Thompson said, his voice calm and reassuring. "And then we can begin the process of evicting them from your property." I felt a surge of relief. Finally, I was taking control. Finally, I was fighting back. "I want them out as soon as possible," I said, my voice firm. "I don't want them living in my apartment for 1 minute longer than necessary." Mr. Thompson nodded. "I understand," he said. "We'll move as quickly as the law allows." The next morning, Mr. Thompson served Daniel with the divorce papers. I imagined his reaction, the shock and disbelief on his face as he realized that I was serious, that I wasn't going to back down. A few hours later, my phone rang. It was Daniel. "Evelyn, how could you do this?" he said, his voice filled with anger and resentment. "You could have at least waited. We could have talked about this." "Talked about what, Daniel?" I said, my voice cold and hard. "Talked about how you were going to leave me for my stepsister? Talked about how you were going to raise your child in my apartment?" He was silent for a moment. "This doesn't have to be like this, Evelyn," he said, his voice softening slightly. "We can work things out. We can go to counseling. We can." "It's over, Daniel," I said, cutting him off. "There's nothing to talk about. You betrayed me in the worst possible way, and I will never forgive you. Just sign the divorce papers and let's get this over with." But, what about the apartment?" he stammered. "Where are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Maybe you and Serena should have thought about that before you decided to sleep together in my bed. Oh, I hope you're both enjoying the new place, because you will be out soon." He was silent again. "Then," he said, his voice filled with desperation, "that's my apartment too, Evelyn. I've been paying half the rent." "Legally, Daniel, it is 100% my apartment," I said. "I will let the law sort that out." Before he could say anything else, I hung up the phone. I didn't want to hear his excuses, his justifications, his pathetic attempts to manipulate me. He started texting and calling me incessantly, bombarding me with messages of remorse, guilt, and anger. I ignored them all. I refused to engage with him. I had nothing left to say. I spent the next few days in a state of suspended animation, waiting for the eviction notice to be served. I barely ate, barely slept. I was consumed by a burning desire for revenge, a relentless need to make them pay for what they had done. Then, one evening, I got a knock on my motel room door. I hesitated for a moment, then cautiously opened it. Standing there, looking haggard and desperate, was Daniel. "Evelyn, please," he said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Can we talk?" I stared at him for a long moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I wanted to slam the door in his face, to tell him to get lost. But something held me back. "What do you want, Daniel?" I asked, my voice cold and hard. "I made a mistake, Evelyn," he said, his eyes filled with tears. "A huge mistake. I don't know what I was thinking. Please, just give me another chance. I promise it will never happen again." He reached out to touch me, but I recoiled, stepping back into the room. "Don't touch me, Daniel," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You lost that right a long time ago. I love you, Evelyn," he pleaded. "I've always loved you. I don't want to lose you." "You already lost me, Daniel," I said, my voice flat. "You lost me the moment you decided to betray me." But, what about us?" he stammered. "What about our marriage? What about our future?" "There is no us, Daniel," I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. "And there is no future. You destroyed it all. You left our future behind the moment you kissed my stepsister." I looked at him, really looked at him, and saw the hollowness in his eyes, the desperation in his face. He looked pathetic, broken, and for a brief moment, I felt a pang of pity. But then, I remembered what he had done. I remembered the pain, the betrayal, the humiliation, and the pity vanished, replaced by a cold, burning rage. "Get out, Daniel," I said, my voice trembling with anger. "Get out of my sight. I never want to see you again." He stared at me for a long moment, his eyes filled with despair. Then, he turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped. His head hung low. I watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of emotions. Relief, anger, sadness, and a sliver of satisfaction. He had begged for forgiveness. He had pleaded for another chance. He had groveled at my feet, and I had turned him away without a second thought. It was a small victory, but it was a victory nonetheless. It was a sign that I was finally taking back control of my life. I closed the door and leaned against it, my heart pounding in my chest. I knew that the road ahead would be long and difficult, but I was ready for it. I was ready to fight back. I was ready to rebuild my life. And I was ready to make Daniel and Serena pay for what they had done. The eviction notice arrived a few days later. I didn't deliver it myself. I left that to Mr. Thompson's firm. I couldn't bear to face Daniel and Serena, not yet. I needed time to steel myself, to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. I imagined their shock and anger as they received the notice, their faces contorted with disbelief. I pictured them scrambling to find a new place to live, their dreams of domestic bliss crumbling around them. The thought brought a grim satisfaction. The day of the eviction was surreal. I parked a block away from the apartment, wanting to witness the spectacle without being directly involved. I watched from a distance as a sheriff's deputy taped the eviction notice to the front door, the bright orange paper a stark symbol of their downfall. A few hours later, a moving van pulled up. Daniel and Serena emerged from the apartment, looking disheveled and defeated. Daniel was loading boxes into the van, his face etched with exhaustion and resentment. Serena stood by, arms crossed, her expression a mixture of anger and entitlement. She was pregnant now, the first signs of her burgeoning belly visible beneath her clothes. The sight didn't stir any sympathy within me, only a cold sense of justice. I watched as they packed up their belongings, their lives, their future, and loaded them into the van. It was a slow, agonizing process, each box a reminder of their betrayal, their deceit, their selfishness. Finally, the van was full. Daniel slammed the back doors shut, his face a mask of fury. He glared at the apartment building, then turned and got into the driver's seat. Serena climbed in beside him, slamming the door behind her. As the van pulled away from the curb, I felt a strange sense of emptiness. They were gone. They were out of my life. And yet, I didn't feel the triumph I had expected. I didn't feel the satisfaction I had craved. Instead, I felt nothing. Just a hollow ache in my chest, a lingering sense of loss. They had taken so much from me, and even though I had exacted my revenge, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had lost something irreplaceable. I drove back to the motel, feeling numb and exhausted. I fell into bed and stared at the ceiling, replaying the events of the past few months in my mind. I thought about Daniel, the man I had loved, the man I had trusted, the man who had betrayed me in the worst possible way. I wondered how he could have done it, how he could have thrown away our years together for a brief moment of lust and deceit. I thought about Serena, the stepsister I had welcomed into my home, the stepsister who had stabbed me in the back. I wondered if she felt any remorse, any guilt for what she had done. I doubted it. I thought about my apartment, the place that had once been my sanctuary, now a symbol of my pain and betrayal. I knew I couldn't live there anymore. The memories were too raw, the emotions too intense. I decided to rent it out. Let someone else fill those rooms with laughter and love, someone who wouldn't taint them with infidelity and deceit. I called a real estate agent and put the apartment on the market. Within a few days, I had several offers. I chose a young couple who were just starting out in their careers, their faces radiant with hope and excitement. I signed the lease agreement, feeling a small sense of closure. I was moving on. I was leaving the past behind. I found a small, cozy apartment in a different neighborhood, far away from the memories and the pain. It wasn't as fancy as my old place, but it was clean, comfortable, and mine. I spent the next few weeks settling into my new life. I started going to therapy, trying to process the trauma of the past few months. I reconnected with old friends who offered me their love and support. I threw myself into my work, finding solace in the creative process. Slowly but surely, I began to heal. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it became more manageable, less consuming. I learned to live with the scars of betrayal, to accept that some wounds never fully heal. One day, a few months after the eviction, I received a phone call from Mr. Thompson. "I have some news about your divorce settlement," he said, his voice professional. "Daniel has agreed to sign the final papers. There's just one small issue." "What is it?" I asked, my heart sinking. "He's demanding a share of the proceeds from the sale of the apartment," Mr. Thompson said. "He claims he contributed to the down payment and the monthly payments, and that he's entitled to a portion of the equity." I felt a surge of anger. "He's out of his mind," I said, my voice trembling. "That apartment is mine. He has no right to any of the money." "I know, Mr. Thompson said. But he's threatening to drag the divorce out, to make things as difficult as possible. If we go to court, it could take months, even years, to resolve. And it could cost you a significant amount of money in legal fees. I sighed. I didn't want to spend any more time or money on this. I just wanted to be done with it. How much is he asking for? I asked. He's asking for half, mister, Thompson said. But I think we can negotiate him down to a more reasonable amount. After a lot of back and forth, we agreed to give Daniel a small percentage of the profits, enough to make him go away without causing any further trouble. It wasn't fair, but it was the price I had to pay to move on with my life. I signed the settlement papers, feeling a sense of relief and resentment. I was finally free, but the story doesn't end there. A few weeks after the divorce was finalized, I received an unexpected visitor. It was Serena. She looked terrible. Her hair was greasy, her clothes were rumpled, and her face was pale and drawn. The pregnancy hadn't done her any favors. She looked exhausted, defeated. "Evelyn, can we talk?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly agreed. I led her inside my apartment, feeling a strange mixture of curiosity and apprehension. We sat down on the couch, facing each other, the silence thick and uncomfortable. "What do you want, Serena?" I asked, my voice cold and guarded. She took a deep breath, her hands trembling. "I need your help," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "My help?" I said, raising an eyebrow. "After everything you've done, you expect me to help you?" "I know I messed up," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I made a terrible mistake. But I didn't mean to hurt you, Evelyn. I swear." "Oh, really?" I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. "Because it sure seemed like you were trying to hurt me. You slept with my husband, you got pregnant with his child, you took my apartment. What part of that wasn't intended to hurt me?" "I was desperate," she said, her voice trembling. "I was lonely. I was vulnerable. Daniel was there for me. He made me feel wanted. I know it's no excuse, but I couldn't help myself." "And what about Daniel?" I asked, my voice rising. "Did he tell you he was unhappy with me? Did he say that he loved you?" Serena hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Yes," she said. "He said he hadn't been happy for a long time. He said you were always working, always stressed, always complaining. He said he needed someone who could appreciate him, someone who could make him happy." I felt a pang of sadness. Had I really been that bad of a wife? Had I really driven Daniel into Serena's arms? But then I remembered what he had done. I remembered the betrayal, the deceit, the humiliation, and the sadness vanished, replaced by a cold, burning rage. "So what do you want from me, Serena?" I asked, my voice hard. "Do you want me to forgive you? Do you want me to feel sorry for you? Because I don't. I don't feel anything for you except contempt. I need money, Evelyn," she said, her voice cracking with emotion. "Daniel lost his job after the divorce. He can't find another one. We're about to be evicted from our new apartment. We have nowhere to go. And I'm pregnant. I can't work. We need help." I stared at her, my heart pounding in my chest. She was asking me for money? After everything she had done? The audacity was unbelievable. "You want money?" I said, my voice trembling with anger. "You want me to give you money? After you slept with my husband and stole my apartment?" "You must be out of your mind. Please, Evelyn," she pleaded. "I'm begging you. I don't know what else to do. I'm desperate." "I'll pay you back, I promise. Just help us get back on our feet. I'm not going to give you a single penny, Serena," I said, my voice cold and unforgiving. "You made your bed? Now you can lie in it. You chose to betray me, to sleep with my husband, to steal my life. Now you have to face the consequences. I had my own goals and you ruined that. So now you'll live with those consequences." Serena burst into tears, sobbing uncontrollably. "You're so cruel, Evelyn," she cried. "You're so heartless. How can you be so cold? I learned from the best, I said, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Now get out of my apartment. I never want to see you again. I stood up and walked to the door, holding it open for her. She hesitated for a moment, then slowly rose and walked out. Her shoulders slumped, her head hung low. I watched her go, feeling a strange mixture of emotions: relief, anger, and a sliver of guilt. I knew I had done the right thing. I couldn't give her money. I couldn't reward her for her betrayal. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been too harsh. She was pregnant. She was desperate. She was in trouble. Was it really so wrong to help her? I wrestled with my conscience for hours, pacing back and forth in my apartment, unable to make up my mind. Finally, I made a decision. I wasn't going to give her money, but I was going to do something else. I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't called in a long time. It was my mother. I took a deep breath and prepared myself for the conversation that was to come. My mother and I had a complicated relationship. She wasn't a bad person, not really, but she was difficult, emotional, demanding, and prone to making impulsive decisions. She had a way of stirring up drama wherever she went. I hadn't spoken to her in months, not since the divorce. I knew she was disappointed in me for not trying to work things out with Daniel, for not being more forgiving. She thought I was being too stubborn, too unforgiving. But I knew that forgiving Daniel and Serena was impossible. Their betrayal was too deep, too painful. I couldn't just pretend it hadn't happened. So I had distanced myself from my mother, hoping to avoid any unnecessary conflict. But now I needed her help, and I knew that she was the only one who could provide it. The phone rang several times before she finally answered. "Evelyn?" she said, her voice surprised. "Is that you? I haven't heard from you in ages." "Hi, Mom," I said, my voice hesitant. "I know. I'm sorry. I've been busy." "Busy with what?" she asked, her voice sharp. "Busy being stubborn and unforgiving?" I sighed. "Mom, please," I said. "I don't want to argue. I just need your help." "My help?" she said, her voice softening slightly. "What's wrong, honey?" "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and explained the situation with Serena. I told her how she had slept with Daniel, how she was pregnant, how they had lost their jobs and were about to be evicted. My mother listened in silence, her breathing heavy. When I was finished, she said, her voice filled with emotion, "Oh, Evelyn, that poor girl. She's made a terrible mistake, but she's still family, and she's carrying a child. We can't just let her suffer." "Mom, I know," I said. "That's why I'm calling you. I can't give her money. I just can't. But I thought maybe you could help her. You always had a soft spot for Serena." My mother was silent for a moment. Then she said, "You know, Evelyn, sometimes I think you're too hard on people. You hold grudges for too long. You need to learn to forgive." "Mom, please," I said, my voice pleading. "This isn't about me. This is about Serena. Can you help her or not?" "I'll think about it," she said, her voice noncommittal. "I need to talk to your father, see what he thinks." I sighed. "Okay, Mom," I said. "Just, please don't take too long. She needs help now." "I'll do what I can, honey," she said. "I promise." We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, feeling a mixture of hope and trepidation. I knew that my mother could be unpredictable. There was no guarantee that she would actually help Serena, but I had done what I could. I had planted the seed. Now it was up to her to nurture it. I spent the next few days waiting, wondering if my mother would come through. I didn't hear from her, and I started to lose hope. Then, one afternoon, my phone rang. It was Serena. "Evelyn, I don't know what you did," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "But thank you." "Your mom called me. She's going to help us. She's going to let us move in with her and Dad. She's going to help us get back on our feet." I felt a surge of relief. My mother had come through. She had done the right thing. I'm glad, Serena, I said, my voice sincere. I hope things work out for you. I know I don't deserve it, she said, her voice trembling. But thank you, Evelyn. Thank you for not giving up on me. Just try to make the most of it, Serena, I said. Try to be a good mother. Try to make amends for the mistakes you've made. I will, she said. I promise. I owe you that much. We said goodbye, and I hung up the phone, feeling a sense of closure. I had done what I could to help Serena without compromising my own values. I had found a way to forgive her without forgetting what she had done. It wasn't a perfect ending, but it was a good start. A start to a new chapter in my life. A chapter filled with healing, forgiveness, and the promise of a brighter future. Life after the divorce was a slow process of rebuilding. I focused on myself, on healing the deep wounds that Daniel and Serena had inflicted. Therapy helped a lot. It gave me a safe space to process my emotions, to confront my insecurities, and to learn to trust again. I threw myself into my work, taking on new projects and challenges. I rediscovered my passion for graphic design, finding solace in the creative process. I started taking classes, learning new skills, and expanding my horizons. I also made an effort to reconnect with old friends, to nurture the relationships that had been neglected during my marriage. We went out to dinner, saw movies, and just spent time together, laughing and reminiscing. Their support and friendship were invaluable. Slowly but surely, I began to feel like myself again. The pain didn't disappear entirely, but it became more manageable, less consuming. I learned to live with the scars of betrayal, to accept that some wounds never fully heal. I started dating again, cautiously dipping my toes back into the world of romance. It was scary, putting myself out there again, opening myself up to the possibility of getting hurt. But I knew that I couldn't let the past define me. I had to move forward, to embrace the possibility of finding love again. I met some interesting people, some nice guys, but nothing clicked. I wasn't ready, not yet. I still had too much healing to do. Then, one day, I met someone who changed everything. His name was Alex. He was an architect, intelligent, kind, and funny. We met at a friend's birthday party, and we hit it off immediately. We talked for hours that night, about everything and nothing. We discovered that we had a lot in common, a shared love of art, music, and travel. He asked me out on a date, and I said yes without hesitation. Our first date was magical. We went to a jazz club, listened to live music, and danced the night away. He was a great dancer, and he made me laugh. I felt a connection with him that I hadn't felt with anyone in a long time. We started seeing each other regularly, and I quickly fell in love. He was everything I had ever wanted in a partner: kind, compassionate, supportive, and understanding. He made me feel safe, loved, and cherished. I told him about my past, about Daniel and Serena, about the betrayal and the divorce. He listened without judgment, offering me his comfort and support. That must have been incredibly painful, he said, his voice filled with compassion. I'm so sorry you had to go through that. It was, I said, my voice trembling, but I'm stronger now. I've learned a lot, and I'm ready to move on. I'm glad, he said, smiling at me, because I think you're amazing, and you deserve to be happy. With Alex, I felt like I could finally let go of the past. I could finally forgive Daniel and Serena, not for their sake, but for my own. I could finally move on with my life, without being weighed down by anger and resentment. A year later, Alex proposed. We had a small, intimate wedding, surrounded by our closest friends and family. It was the happiest day of my life. As I stood at the altar, holding Alex's hand, I looked out at the faces of the people I loved, and I felt a sense of peace and contentment. I had been through so much pain, so much heartbreak, but I had survived. I had rebuilt my life, and I had found love again. I knew that the scars of the past would always be with me, but they no longer defined me. They were just a part of my story. a story of betrayal, resilience, and ultimately triumph. And as I looked into Alex's eyes, I knew that I had finally found my happy ending, a happy ending that I deserved.